Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, audiences met two new characters who have now become fan favorites, Proximus Caesar and Raka. However, with both characters meeting their ends in the film, for now, many have speculated that either one or both of them could end up returning in the future. I'm here to give my thoughts on the likelihood of both or either of them happening. If you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. Enjoy the video. Hey everybody, and welcome to Ape Nation, your #1 source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and today I am talking about a much discussed fan theory that's been around since the release of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes earlier this summer, and that would be the speculated survival and return of everybody's favorite new orangutan and Caesar follower, Raka, as well as the most memed bonobo villain since Koba, Proximus Caesar. The idea of either of these two characters making their return in the next movie is something that many fans have speculated about and many are hoping for, so I thought it would be fun to give some pros and some cons about each one coming back, some reasons why I think it's likely or unlikely that either of them could come back, and finally giving an overall percentage chance of how likely I think it is that either of them come back in the next movie. Starting things off with Raka and some pros about bringing him back in the next movie. These are the reasons that I think it would be a great thing for this character to make his return. First, I think that Raka is a key, if not the key character in Noah's journey in that first movie in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. The character of Raka elevated Noah in a way and kind of awakened him, and I think that Raka's knowledge and Raka's wisdom and his morals and his ethics, I think, are something that we're starting to rub off on Noah in a way. And I think Raka just has a lot more that could be taught to Noah. He has a lot more to teach him and a lot more to pass on to him. And so I think that's something that could be very important in the next movie that could help Noah along his journey, whichever direction that goes. So that's one reason I think that it would be a great thing for Raka to come back. The next thing I want to talk about, the fact that Raka is just a fan favorite character. He was, I think, for the most part, if you asked like the majority of fans who their favorite character coming out of Kingdom was, I'd say probably at least 70% of people would say Raka. I think he was so beloved. He was a big hit with all audiences of all ages, all genders, everything. So I think that would just be a big win for fans and for audiences, and I think people would love to see him back. And then finally, and this kind of ties a little bit back into my first point, but having Raka there would allow for Noah to be able to learn more about Caesar in this next movie. You know, he wasn't able to really learn everything there was to know about him, but I think Raka was on the cusp of starting to teach Noah about Caesar and teach him the order of Caesar and the teachings of Caesar. So that is something that we won't really get to see if Raka doesn't come back in the next movie. So Noah getting to learn more about Caesar, his history, what he did for apes, and how it could translate into what Noah could be as a leader in the potential next movie. You know, I think that's something that could be very big and very important. That's something I really want to see in the next movie, and that is something that I think would be key and why I think that it would be great for Raka to come back. Now, as much as I think there are some great reasons for Raka to come back, there are also some reasons why I would be a little hesitant towards it and why I think there could be some issues with it. Not necessarily problems, but maybe mild issues. And I have two. The first one is that it could potentially take some stakes away for future character deaths. This is something that we've seen in a lot of the bigger genre sci-fi fantasy franchise films of the last 15 or so years really lean into more, is just nobody's ever really dead is kind of the thing that gets touted around a lot. And so having Raka die, but then not really die, you run the risk of taking down some of the stakes in case another character dies. Am I supposed to believe that this character is gone for good too, or are they just going to come back in the third movie, you know? So I think that is a risk you raise by bringing Raka back. It's just a concern I have. Depends on how it's executed, but it also depends on something else that I'll talk about in a little bit, but I think it's something that should at least be taken into consideration. And then the other downside of potentially having Raka come back is the devil's advocate to a point I'd made earlier. And something I just mentioned a little bit ago was how Raka is someone who will be able to teach Noah the teachings of Caesar and how he'll be able to give him all of that information, and it'll help shape Noah into more of a leader. That being said, having Noah need to be more independent and need to learn more about ape history and Caesar on his own, I think would actually be a really interesting challenge for Noah. I think that would be something that would be satisfying for us as audience members and us as fans to get to see, and having Raka there to just give him all of that information that he really needs, I think that could potentially be something that takes away from the potential of Noah really coming into his own even further as a leader and doing that work himself. So it's something that I can see both sides of the argument. I think it would be great to have Raka come in and teach Noah all this stuff, but I also think it would be great to see Noah learn all of it on his own and become a little more independent and not need Raka to teach him about all the stuff about Caesar. So there's a pro and a con when it comes to that aspect of this character and what his being in the next movie could be. Moving on to reasons for and against why I think Raka will come back. And I have 3 reasons for, and the first one is that we never saw a body. We never saw Raka's body actually die. We never saw where the water took him. We never saw where those waterfalls eventually had him land. We don't know if he ultimately just washed up on a beach somewhere. We don't know if he got picked up by somebody. We don't know if he managed to swim his way out somewhere. We have no idea what happened to him. All we know is that he disappeared into the water and was never seen again throughout the rest of the movie. And something I mentioned earlier is that nobody's ever really dead thing that we've seen in a lot of movies in the last decade or so. That kind of goes hand in hand with the saying of, oh, we never saw a body, so until you see a body, they're not dead. And I think that actually may end up being the case here. For me, it's one of the biggest reasons that it would make sense for him to come back, or at least why I think it's most likely for him to come back, because we just never saw what actually happened to him. The next thing I had to mention is you can hear the sounds of an orangutan at the end of the credits. Very similar to how at the end of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, you could hear the sound of rustling and the sound of a chimpanzee moving around. That was chalked up to being the sound of Koba still being alive, which ultimately didn't end up happening, but similar situation here. They've left the door open for Raka to come back in the next movie by having that little hint. You know, it doesn't confirm anything, but it definitely leaves the door open. So that's a big tell that that could be the direction they're heading. And then finally, when it comes to story structure, something I've mentioned countless times on this channel, you look at Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and it follows that traditional Joseph Campbell hero's journey that you see in stuff like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, etc. And so having that wise older mentor character return in some form in the second chapter would fall right in line with that formula. You look at Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, who dies in the first movie, then comes back as Gandalf the White in the second movie. You look at Obi-Wan, who dies in the first movie, then comes back as a Force ghost to help Luke in the next 2 movies. So having this type of character, this character archetype, come back in the second chapter after disappearing in the first one would line right up with what we've seen in this type of storytelling before. So again, it just makes sense, and it makes it all the more likely that Raka is going to come back. And to even double down on that a little bit more when I get to my next point, which is the reasons against Raka coming back. And ultimately, I have none. There aren't really any logical reasons that I can think of that would go against Raka coming back, except for he died in the first one, with quotes around died. He got taken away by water in the first one. That's really it. That's the only real point that I could have against the likelihood of him coming back. At the end of the day, there's a lot of good that could come from him coming back. There's a lot of really logical, sensible reasons why he would come back and why the filmmakers would bring him back and why it makes sense and why it's very likely that he's going to come back. So that leads me to how ultimately I feel about the character coming back and how likely I think it is that he's going to come back. And I think that the odds of Raka coming back are 75%. And honestly, I'm kind of lowballing it, but I'm still sticking with that number. I think 75%. I think there's a pretty good to very good chance that we see Raka again in the next movie. It just makes sense. I think there's a lot of good that could come with it. There's some possible downsides that could come with it as well, but ultimately it just makes the most sense to go with 75% odds of Raka coming back. Now, moving on from Raka and turning things to the other character that has been heavily speculated about possibly coming back in the next movie, Proximus Caesar. And when it comes to the pros of Proximus Caesar returning in the next movie, I don't have a lot, but I do have 2, and I think they're pretty decent points. The first one is that I think it would be a great opportunity to develop the character a lot further and potentially even either redeem him or set him up for a redemption. I think that, and while I don't necessarily think that is the direction they would go with this character if he were to come back, I think the possibility is there. It would be something new for the franchise. But like I said, it would be really great to get this character a little more fleshed out, to get to see him be a little more developed. One of the biggest criticisms, I think, from a lot of fans, even fans like myself, who loved the character of Proximus Caesar, and a lot of people loved Proximus Caesar, but one of the biggest critiques of the character, if not the biggest and potentially the only critique of the character, is that he wasn't in the movie enough, that we didn't get to know him as well as we wanted to. And I think to have him come back would definitely help that issue. We would get to see more of him, we'd get to learn more about him, we get to dive a bit deeper into who he is as a character. And I think that would be really great to do for a character that I personally really loved and would love to get to learn more about and see more of. So I think that's one really big upside to having Proximus Caesar return. The other big pro and big upside to having him come back would be it would break a trend in Planet of the Apes that has never been broken, and that is bringing back a villain for multiple movies. This is something that I wanted to happen starting with Kingdom. This is a character who I wanted to see be the main villain across all three movies. Now, I'm not necessarily saying he has to be the main villain in the next and the third movie, but it would be cool to see a villain finally come back and be the main villain, or even come back at the end of this movie and then be the main villain in the third movie with more depth and an even bigger threat that time. It's something that I think would be really great and something refreshing for the Planet of the Apes franchise, and so that is why I think it would be a big positive to have him come back in the next movie. But just like with Raka, I do also have some cons, some things that I don't think would be great for bringing the character back, and one of them is the same as with Raka. I think it would potentially take away the stakes for a future character death. I think that, especially if you bring back Raka as well, I think this would take away some stakes for any future character deaths, and I'm not going to reiterate all my points as to why I think that would be bad, but I feel the same way about that and that I do if you were to do it with Raka. I just don't want them to take out so many characters and then just bring them back the next movie or multiple movies later. I just think when you do that too much, you take away stakes. Now, the other reason that I think it wouldn't necessarily be a great idea is because I'm not sure what's really left for Proximus in this story. And by this story, I mean Noah's story. You know, you look at Noah's story in the first movie, and yes, Proximus is the reason that a lot of the stuff happens to Noah in that first movie, but there's not really a personal tie between the two. There's nothing that really says these two characters are entwined, that this character of Proximus Caesar is necessary to be throughout the rest of Noah's story, and that's ultimately what we're going to see, Noah's story. And so I don't know if there's any real room there to have a lot of Proximus Caesar stuff going on. And also, I just don't know where they could really take him next. Like I said, you do have potential to set him up for a possible redemption, but really it comes down to it's going to be either revenge and then ultimately being defeated, or a redemption and then maybe even still then being defeated. You know, I think those are the only real two directions they could go with this character, revenge or redemption. And I'm not saying that neither of those could be exciting, couldn't be well executed, couldn't be interesting. I just don't know what purpose that serves in Noah's overall story. I don't know what purpose it serves in the overall narrative that's being told here. And so I don't necessarily think it's a terrible thing if they bring him back, but that is a downside that I don't know if they'd be able to get over. So those are some of the reasons that I think it would be not so great of an idea to bring back Proximus Caesar. Now, as for the reasons that I think it would make sense and it is potentially likely that Proximus Caesar comes back, is a similar reason to why I think it's possible and likely that Raka comes back, is that we don't see a body. We never actually see Proximus Caesar's dead corpse in this movie at all. We see him fall off the cliff and we see him being dragged into the water, but we never see what happens after that. That being said, his death felt a bit more definitive, and it was pretty clear that he hit that water hard and he went under pretty intensely. So I think it's a lot harder to buy the whole, oh, we never saw what happened to him narrative, when what we saw on screen, despite the fact that there's no body at the end of it, it's pretty clear that he was killed in that moment. That being said, again, we don't know for sure. And that's really the only reason I have that would make it likely that he does come back in the next movie, because I actually have three reasons why I don't think it's very likely that he's going to come back. Now, the first thing, and I kind of talked about this already, but it's even less likely if Raka comes back, because bringing back 2 dead characters, I just don't see them doing. And if they're going to bring back one of them, it's not going to be Proximus Caesar. So I think the likelihood of Proximus Caesar coming back goes away entirely if they bring back Raka. The next point is that it would make more sense for him to return in a potential 3rd movie, or maybe even at the end of this 2nd movie, but it really just, I don't see him coming back at all. But if he did, it would make more sense to bring him back in a 3rd movie. Let the next movie be more about Noah. Let the next movie be more about a more personal villain. Let it be about a villain that challenges Noah in a different way than Proximus did, instead of just bringing him back. And so I think it makes logical sense that if they're gonna bring him back, it would be in the 3rd movie. Again, I don't necessarily know if they're gonna bring him back at all, but if they did, it makes a lot more sense to hold off on doing that until movie number 3. And then the final reason, and this isn't necessarily mean anything concrete, but it would just be similar to that Joseph Campbell style of storytelling that was done in Kingdom that I mentioned for why it makes sense that Raka would come back. There's a trend in the Planet of the Apes franchise that I already mentioned it earlier about we never see returning villains that would apply heavily here. The Planet of the Apes franchise has always had one-off villains. It's a big part of the DNA of the franchise. We've never seen a villain span across more than one movie at a time. We've seen characters that had villain roles come back later. You know, we had Koba kind of in a ghost role in War. You saw Dr. Zaius come back in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, but not so much in a main villain role. So it's been done before, but it's always been each movie gets its own villain. And so after seeing how they handled Proximus in the last movie, I just feel like they're not going to buck that trend. I think we're going to continue to see one-off villains in every single movie, and I think they're all going to be great, just like they have always for the most part been great. But I don't think they're going to buck that trend, and that is the 3rd and final reason why I don't think it is very likely that they bring back Proximus Caesar in the next Planet of the Apes movie. And that leads me to what I think is the percentage of the likelihood that Proximus Caesar comes back in the next movie, and that is 30%. As much as I loved this character, as much as I would love to see Kevin Durand come back and play the role, as much as I think he does have some potential for further development and even potentially some kind of redemption arc, I just think it makes way more sense to bring back Raka, and it makes way more sense to keep Proximus out of the rest of this story. He had his role, he served it well, and I loved what we got with him, but at the end of the day, I think 30%, I could go even a little bit higher, maybe up to 40%, but really I think 30% is as likely as it's gonna get to bring this character back in the next movie. But those were my thoughts on the potential possibility of Raka and Proximus Caesar coming back in the sequel to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with my points? Do you think I'm right on the money with thinking Raka is going to come back but Proximus isn't? What do you think about my points for and against, the pros, the cons, how likely versus how not likely? I want to know what you guys have to say down in the comments below. Thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.